Hello, and welcome to another episode of the One Deeper podcast. This episode, I have Dr. Eric Postma. Dr. Postma is a professor of AI at Tilburg University School of Humanities and Digital Sciences in the Cognitive Science and AI department. My first official interaction with Eric, who he insists on me calling him Eric, but feels weird, Dr. Postma, is as a student in his computer vision class, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I liked the way it was taught. I learned a lot in that class. It really changed the way I looked at the world and how I appreciated what my eyes do for me. Not just my eyes, but my brain, my senses, all sorts of stuff. And in this episode, we talk about what it means to see the world from the depth and breadth of what that means. We talk about quantum mechanics. We talk about life. We talk about Tommy Postma, who is probably the greatest cartoonist in the world. You should check out his website. Yeah, please enjoy a conversation with Dr. Postma. I enjoyed speaking to him, and I hope you enjoy listening to it. Peace. Dr. Postma. Nice. All right. I'm gonna turn this thing up a bit. Everyone's different. Like some people, like Giacomo, have to turn the amplifier way down because he's very excited. But some people are like very soft spoken. So like Marine, I have to like really turn the amplifier up.
Yeah, these are different personalities. You
know? Okay. So my first question I want to ask you is, who is Tommy Postma, and why is he your favorite cartoonist?
Tommy Postma, yes. Did you visit his website?
Yeah, I did.
Everybody should visit his website. It's the site is tommypostma.nl. And so he he was inspired by these cartoon books called Dogman. Do you know them? Probably not. You need to have children in that age group. So Dogman cartoons, I think it's originally American, but they're very funny. It's about a dog whose head is severed and put on a policeman's body or something like that.
Jesus, what?
Yeah, it sounds very awkward, but children love these cartoons, and it's very funny.
Yeah.
So whenever you are in a bookshop, you should check it out. But he was inspired by that, and now he created his own cartoon, which is on this website. So my older son, he made a website for him, and I put his cartoons on there.
Nice. Yeah. I, honestly, for a second, when I first saw it, I was like, "Oh, must be some kind of cool like cartoonist." I was like, I clicked it, and then I was like, and I took it to a page. It didn't load very fast, and I was like, "What's going on?" And then I checked the next one. Oh, it's just like kids. Oh, it's his son probably. It took me a second to go.
Because I explained him how internet works. I said,
yeah.
now you should hope that people link to your site, and then said, I will link to your site. And so I'm probably the only person who links to his site. But after today, many more people will link to his site.
Many more people will check out Tommy Postma. Okay, so that was my first question. Now let's ask an easy question.
Yeah, this was a hard one.
What is reality?
Reality, nobody knows.
Okay. So that's the reason I asked this, right? But please continue.
No, nobody knows. Nobody knows what reality
is. Because, the reason I asked is because is there a difference between what we perceive and what is actually out there, actually in physical reality?
Yes, definitely. That's clear. It's it's known from psychophysics and psychology and neuroscience that our visual system or our awareness is just creating a kind of reality that we perceive. And the simplest example is other animals that have other sensors and other sensitivities. They perceive a different world. Now, you can say there's still a lot of overlap, but I think, what is his name? There's this famous researcher who became a bit esoteric because Donald Hoffman, that's his name. Mm-hmm. He was a very formal computer vision guy. But I read his book and I was not totally convinced, although he has a point. What he did was evolutionary algorithm experiments where he actually showed, or he claims that it shows that evolution does not optimize for veridicity, so that the internal representations or the awareness is the same thing as the outer world. It's a thing that you need, the perception that you need to survive. And he goes a bit further than that, because I would stop there, and that's why I don't like his book that much, because he's getting too much out of this experiment. But I think from an evolutionary perspective, the perception does not have to correspond to the outer world. Now, the more deeper question is, of course, what is this outer world? If you ask people in physics, it's not even clear what it is, and we don't understand that at all.
Yeah, like we don't perceive the quantum mechanics of the world.
No.
Right?
No, and of course you could, and many people in physics argue, well, on a macroscopic level, this does not play an important role. But still, we have processes at a very low level, even photons that are entering our retina. So you don't know for sure. And of course, we know that the world of quantum mechanics is the only real world. And I think what you should explain is not why why the quantum world is so weird. What you should explain is why our macroscopic world is the way we perceive it.
Right. Like, I'm just trying. So what's actually yesterday I asked ChatGPT to. I said the prompt was, suppose that I am a person who has only a basic understanding of arithmetic. How would you structure a curriculum to get me up to speed on quantum mechanics, right? And it gave me a bunch of stuff, and I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. So, and then I took it and I put it on the theoretical physics forum, and I was like, what do you guys think about this thing? So I haven't checked the replies yet, but I'll check today. I've been getting kind of curious about quantum mechanics because it's apparently, I don't know anything about it, okay? But apparently it's the the best explanation we have for what the world is actually, the universe actually is.
Yeah, at the microscopic level.
Yes.
Yeah. And actually, the mathematics is not so. If you understand complex analysis or complex numbers, so it's not the most complicated thing in physics. And I'm not claiming that I fully understand everything, but the basics are quite easy to understand.
Okay.
And I think it's interesting to know, but it's a real riddle. And most people working in physics simply ignore it. It's the famous "shut up and calculate" approach.
Yeah. Yes, nice.
But people like Sean Carroll, they are really, they put forward that this is a real issue that we have to address. Why is this? And what I said is one perspective, that you have to explain why the macroscopic world looks as it is. Other people say, why does the microscopic world behave so strangely?
Yeah, so I'm reading this book by David Deutsch, Beginning of Infinity.
Yeah.
And he has this a lot of quantum mechanics examples and stuff like that. It's hard. Like, I'm trying to keep up with it. Like, because like every page I'm like, wait, what? And I have to go back a few times.
It's so counterintuitive.
Yeah.
And that's fascinating.
So one sort of intuition that I have. So I went down this rabbit hole of sort of trying to understand the space of possible actions you can take in the future, right? So I have been, ever since I mean, for a while, long time now, I've been really curious about anxiety, right? And so what is it? Why do we experience it, etc.? And from what I've read and what I've understood, it is both anxiety and, let's say, it's it's opposite depression, let's say. It's something to do with the future, or like or the possible space of things that could happen or did happen, whatever it is, right? Yeah. So let's just talk about anxiety, because like the way I think about it, and I've read an interesting paper proposing a entropy-based model for understanding what anxiety is.
Yeah.
And the possible, so in terms of so what the gist of it is, that it's like you perceive at any given point in time, if the possible behavioral space is not constrained adequately, you perceive that as a state of heightened anxiety, because there's too many, the entropy is high entropy states, right?
Yeah.
So one thing that I found interesting is that at any given moment, like from moment to moment, there is no the entropy is perfectly determined, right? Like at the point of observation, it's perfectly determined. Like I can think about what I'm going to do in an hour from now, but when that hour comes, like, and that 60-minute, like when that moment occurs, there is no anxiety in that moment, right?
No.
It only exists in the next and the next and the next and the next,
anticipating on
right? And I don't know enough about quantum mechanics to understand, but I like this intuition that I have that, like, at the moment of occurrence, observation, everything is perfectly determined because it has happened.
Yeah, and that violates the basic principle of quantum mechanics. Although one of the interpretations, which is not very popular, is superdeterminism. So everything is determined, which would be a solution for all these riddles of quantum mechanics, for the measurement problem. But there's only a few people, like one of them is Sabine Hossenfelder. You know her, probably. She's having a lot of funny podcasts about it. But I think that's one interpretation. But the current or the prevailing interpretation, that's pure randomness. And,
so the universe is not a deterministic place.
That's what the prevailing opinion or interpretation of quantum mechanics is. There's a fundamental randomness up to the point that you make the measurement. And that is the strange thing, that you have two entangled particles that could be light years departed from each other. But once you measure a property in one of them, on one side of this entangle, the other one is determined automatically, which does seem to imply faster than light communication, but that's not true. That's one of the riddles of quantum mechanics, how that works. But that it works like that is clear. And it means that up to the point that you make the measurements, there is randomness. So there's not a hidden...
So randomness is what? How do you define this? Randomness is what? The space of possible things that could happen?
It's undetermined.
Okay.
Undetermined. So if you can have...
But it's not like anything can happen, right?
Well, actually... Well, not anything, but we're talking now about entangled particles. Yes. So they are kind... In a sense, they're one particle, but they could be light years away from each other. And if you make this measurement of one property in one of the pair of, for instance, electrons that are entangled, you automatically know what the other one is. And it's determined at the moment that you take the measurement. So it's as if the universe decides at that moment, this is the property that belongs to that entangled particle. But that property is only there if you take the measurement. Before you take the measurement, that property is not there.
But how do you know it's not there without taking the measurement?
Now, that's the point, and that was Einstein's frustration. He said there's a hidden variable somewhere there. And now they performed all kinds of smart experiments. And I'm not a physics professor, but I read these things because I liked this as an amateur. But they did a lot of experiments to show that there are no hidden variables. And the famous one are by John Bell, who did that in the, I think, 1960s or so. And he devised these smart experiments to show this. And of course, we had, I think it was last year, the Nobel Prize for Alain Aspect is one of them. And also this Swiss guy, whose name I forgot, and Clauser, who did these experiments to show that there are no hidden variables. Actually, to show that up to the moment where you make the measurement, there is no hidden variable. There's always a loophole, and one loophole is superdeterminism. That everything is determined. Everything is determined. So if you say, well, it's predetermined that if I make a measure in Alpha Centauri of this this element of an entangled particle, is determined that will be having the measurement up, for instance. And then automatically the other entangled particle is down or also up. And if that's predetermined, then there's no mystery there, because this was already in the deterministic system. So if you believe in a deterministic universe, then everything is predetermined that happens. There's no randomness. That's the other side of it. And that's counter to the prevailing opinion about what quantum mechanics implies, and it's all randomness.
And wouldn't you say, like, in that sense, biological systems seems to be very well attuned, like they behave, let's forget the quantum mechanics, right? Doesn't evolution imply that it's sort of like a hedge against randomness? It's like there's an implicit assumption that things are random, and therefore we're gonna act accordingly. Okay, like for example, okay, so the mechanism for storing energy as fat evolved many hundreds of millions ago, right? Isn't that like a sort of, and then it's persisted for hundreds of millions of years.
Yeah.
That's sort of saying, okay, well, we don't know where energy is going to come from, and it's very helpful to have a way of keeping it.
Yeah.
In a way that can be accessed later.
Yeah.
So, in a sense, so I'm trying to think if the quantum mechanical nature of the universe factors into the biological reality that we perceive in everyday things. But that's
I don't think that's at least to the level that we understand evolution now, because this is about evolution. You don't need quantum mechanics. I'm not saying that it's irrelevant, but you don't need it to explain the mechanism of evolution and how these complex structures arise. Of course, we don't fully understand how they arise, but that they can arise is clear, and because we have evidence for that. And we cannot mimic that in computers, or we have a hard time mimicking that. But it might also have to do with the lack of capacity and complexity. Because it's clear that this is called complex science, complexity science, that this is arising as a kind of emergent property from the complex interactions of that is very, very hard to model or to encompass how complex the world really is. I mean, if you focus on a very small domain of biology, for instance, the behavior of ants and how ants evolve and how they are constructed, it's enormously complicated, and that's only ants, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think you don't need it. And in terms of randomness, I think we cannot distinguish between randomness and pseudo-randomness. Well, we have a hard time doing that because on the computers we use these pseudo-randomness generators, which is just deterministic chaos, and that's fully predictable if you know it. But in practice, it doesn't make that a huge difference if you initialize your neural network with real random numbers or with a good pseudo-random number algorithm. So in a way, you could say the randomness that we observe in nature might very well be a reflection of superdeterminism, because we wouldn't be able to see the difference unless you have a very powerful system to make predictions. But given the complexity, it would be masked.
So, under superdeterminism, would that mean that from the moment of the Big Bang, everything has been determined, right? From because the next state is fully determined by the previous state, and then all the way back.
And of course, this is kind of theoretical thing because in the end it doesn't matter, because if we describe systems composed of many molecules, for instance, in statistical physics, as the name implies, you even if the individual molecules behave in a deterministic way, you average over them, because the details of the micro level do not affect the macroscopic behavior. Right. And in a way, that might also apply to a certain extent for quantum mechanics, unless you are near a black hole or something. And that's why people in physics are very much interested in black holes, because that's where all these standard physics things do not apply.
So there's general relativity, and as I can understand it, there's quantum mechanics.
Yeah,
and they don't play well together as it exists.
You could say general relativity is about the macro world, and quantum mechanics is about the micro world. And we're sure, you could say that we know that general relativity is wrong in the macroscopic level, and you can't say that about quantum mechanics, because there has not been a violation of quantum mechanics in all these measurements. The main challenge is to bridge this gap between the two, and that has to do with gravity probably.
Yeah, so people are trying with quantum gravity and all sorts of stuff.
Which I'm not an expert in, but I'm very much interested in it as an amateur. As
same, exactly. So it's like because anything that sort of shakes up my intuition about what the world is, I find real interesting.
Yeah, me too. Actually, the reason that I started studying physics, actually, because I read a book by Albert Einstein, which sounds very high level, but it was a very accessible book that he wrote for the kind of public text for for people to understand relativity theory. But I was most interested in the part that discussed the perception of simultaneity, which is important for relativity. But I thought that you should study physics if you wanted to know more about perception. That was wrong. So I spent my first year in a theoretical physics program, and then I switched to psychology.
What made you realize that was wrong?
An uncle, so a friend of my mother, he told me you should go to psychology, and I said no, never, because I associated with clinical psychology, and I was not interested in that. He said no. You just have to go through this first year of psychology, and then you can go into this cognitive science and AI program. And that's what I did. And in hindsight, it was very useful to have this first year at psychology. You have to imagine you come from theoretical physics, where I learned interesting things, by the way. And I think it still affects my research. But then I went into psychology, which is there were girls there. And it was,
there were girls there.
Yeah. And it was a totally different culture.
No, I completely understand.
Yeah, but most interesting, there were courses that I hated when I saw them, but when I enrolled in these courses, like cultural psychology, I learned so much about, for instance, how wars arise due to cultural misunderstandings between the British and the India, for instance. Small misunderstandings which have to do with culture. You never can understand how a different culture, how that feels like if you were not raised there. And that really opened my eyes for another perspective on the complexity of the world. And the same was true for biological psychology. Very interesting. And a course called Functieleer, which means kind of psychophysics, was also very inspiring. And all these courses, there were also some clinical psychology courses. Well, I picked up something from that. Like Freud really had very interesting publications. It was not about his psychotherapy, but it was about his brain studies.
I think we should give a shout out to Freud, because so much of what he discovered is sort of part of the psychology back. Like people focus on the things that he got wrong, maybe, but he contributed so the ratio of contribution to things he got wrong is ridiculous, right?
That's true. Yeah.
So
I learned a lot, but I quickly moved towards the more technical. So I spent 8 years. These were good times. I spent 8 years studying at the university, starting with physics. And once I entered into this cognitive science program, I wandered around through physics, computer science. I did all kinds of things. And that was really, for me, a Valhalla to collect all this.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. Similarly, I'm on like a very similar weird path. But I wanted to do psychology. I mean, I was really considering doing psychology before I started this program, and something just was missing. I don't know what it was. It's just like I didn't feel challenged. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's like an easy thing. It's just like I don't know. I just liked the math, and I liked computational things, and I liked psychology as well. But I couldn't find a way to put them together until I came to this program.
I can relate to that, because it's at the outside. It's making measurements, and I want to go in, and not as a neuroscientist, but really to understand it. So I always struggled with how the visual system could deal with the complex task of recognizing objects. And psychology only gave answers, and cognitive science only gave answers with these box and arrow models, and you could make all kinds of measurements and reaction times, etc. But I think due to computational modeling, especially that we now have convolutional neural networks, they're the best model for the visual system in terms of understanding it intuitively that we have now. And of course, now we have transformers, and this is all changing. But I think that's really a step forward in understanding vision, although it's a very simple model, but it's better than any other model that we have.
So let's see if we can go from outside in, right? Okay, so first of all, is it worth discussing what light is? Because that is principally we are pretty sure, right? That's how the eyes get their information, is through light.
Yes, photons.
Right? Yeah, they're pretty good about that. Yeah. All right, so what is light?
Light is an electromagnetic wave, and the frequency that we can perceive, or the range of frequencies, are associated with colors. And the intensity is determined by the number of photons. There's all kinds of nonlinear relations, of course. But the physical properties of light, as studied in physics, they are the basis for vision.
Okay. So, and then from there on, things get very
very complicated.
Things get very-
Because the first step is what happens when a light enters your retina, hits your retina. You have the eye. Well, first of all, the eyes are moving all the time. They're not stable. So you have these microsaccades and tremor. And it's well known that if your eyes don't move, that you don't see anything. So this movement is important for perception.
What's that about? That seems very weird to me.
Yeah, that seems weird. And maybe that's a kind of evolutionary solution to a problem, because our eye is a kind of inside-out design. So all the wiring to the receptors is in the eye. That's why we have this black spot, because all these wiring that connect the receptors to the rest of the brain have to go outward of the eye. And somehow in evolution, there was a decision by somebody, by the process, to come up with this design where the receptor wiring is in the eye. And this is, of course, problematic because it's obscuring the light that enters the retina. And maybe this trembling of the eye is one solution. And that sounds like an engineering solution. But, of course, the eyes also have to move very quickly. So the ballistic movements of our eyes are near optimal. That's the fastest speed that you can get with these kind of balls.
Like, maybe it is the case that, like, okay, so imagine maybe the net benefit of any working design was so great that it just, like, there was no corrective. I mean, it's just like, okay, so you can't see. All of a sudden you can see, and it's like, okay, it doesn't matter how this thing works. Let's just, imagine the adaptive advantage of between not being able to perceive and being able to perceive. If I recall, it started out, the first evidence of it emerging is just the ability to see between light and dark, right?
Yeah,
just like moving towards light, moving from dark.
Yeah, so I think that's the whole characteristic of evolution, that it makes a decision somewhere and might be suboptimal, but then it's exploiting this, you cannot go back, or it's hard to go back.
Are there other designs for?
Yeah. There are other ones, like insects have these other types of eyes where the receptors are outside and the wiring is in the back, like in CCD cameras and all human design cameras. So we are the ones with the odd cameras. And
all mammals are there? Or just mammals or birds?
No, there are more. So it's not only in humans, but
okay.
but insects have this. I forgot the name, but this other type of eye, and there are all kinds of variants of vision systems. There's a whole book's written about it. Very interesting repertoire of things. And this design has been discovered by evolution several times in several branches of the evolutionary tree. But what I want to say is that this tendency, this requirement that you should be able to quickly saccade to another position, so move your eyes to another position, requires muscles. And these muscles have to respond quickly because this tiger can come. So this is also an evolutionary pressure. And to maintain the stability and at the same time maintain a fast response, introduce some tremor in these muscles that keep the eye in, and that gives a tremor to the eye. So and we don't know the order, of course, but I could imagine that from an evolutionary perspective, you had to deal with this inside-out design, where you have all these wires in front of your receptors, but at the same time deal with the tremor of these muscles. And the combination is that your eyes are actually responding to changes and not to static light. And there's a famous researcher, what was his name, McKay, who had this suggestion that you can compare it a bit like if you have a blind person with a stick, he or she is moving the stick around to feel what's there in the environment. And maybe our eyes are like 1.5 million sticks that stick out to see what's happening. Of course, it's not like a stick, it's more things coming in. But I like this metaphor because it gives a kind of different viewpoint on the kind of intuitive notion that our eyes are like cameras. They're not like cameras. They pick up changes, and that's an interesting thought.
And there are animals that have no eyes or are completely blind, right?
Yeah, but they have other sensors, maybe thermosensors or
Interesting. But the fact that eyes are such a stable part of most living things is pretty interesting, right? It's like,
Yeah.
it's this. So what is the best way in nature to transfer information from one place to the next? It's probably light, right?
I'm not sure. It might also be sound. I think it depends on your ecological niche where you are. So in our world now, with all these laptops and all this, in our world, vision is very prominent. But I could imagine many ecological regions where vision is not so important. It's more sound or touch.
Because there's no light. Maybe there's
yeah,
no light.
for instance, or it's not so informative.
In the bottom of trenches in the ocean, there's no light. Light doesn't get that far.
I've never been there, but I guess
Yeah,
you're
but
right.
so there are all these weird animals that
Yeah.
that have no eyes and they just they move around. It's weird. Like
So one of my frustrations that I had when I was doing this psychology and also cognitive science, I taught a lot of cognitive science basic courses also at Maastricht University. And I was always frustrated that these models were kind of engineered like computer programs with these boxes and arrows, whereas I knew from biology that biological systems are just developed to survive in a kind of environment. And it means that it's not a box and arrow, it's a kind of input with an output, and the output feeds back on the input, a feedback loop system. So it's more like cybernetics in the old days, or now deep reinforcement learning, robotics. And I think that's much more realistic to understand biological systems. You cannot take them apart like an engineer. Yeah, you can do that, but then you have to realize that they're part of feedback loop systems.
yeah,
And that we do not understand the complex or do not appreciate the complexity of the outside world.
for sure. And so when the feedback loop phenomenon, I mean, that shows up in a lot of different things. So I was curious about this idea of, I was introduced to this guy called Wilfred Pareto and his distribution about for example, he's famous for the 80-20 rule. It's few people do 80% of the work and whatever it is, and then few production or whatever. And that's sort of a consequence of a feedback loop in the sense that, so I took a bunch of completely random data sets. So the number of reviews in Airbnb, the number of points scored in the NBA, the game sales for a year, and you plot the distribution. They look exactly the same, right? Yeah. Because for example, if one player is starting to score a lot of points, people tend to give him the ball more, and he tends to have more opportunities, so he scores more, and then he gets more opportunities and keeps scoring more. Yeah. So those kind of loops are everywhere in the world.
Yeah. And they're also characteristic of these small world networks. So you see it at all kinds of and maybe even Zipf's law is related to it. So these are scaling laws. So in physics, they have these scaling laws for all kinds of systems. And that's one of the things I picked up from my physics background, that in statistical physics, they describe complex systems like collectives of humans, collectives of data, whatever, in terms of scaling laws, because they see that there's universal behavior that is somehow independent of the microscopic behaviors. So if you think about, I want to describe the behavior of a society, then that's very complicated because each element in this society is a human being, and we know human beings are very complex, have their own opinions, own personalities. But if you look at the collective, you can average all this out and look for kind of universal properties that apply to the collective. And that can be very helpful to describe things like economics or these kind of rules.
That's pretty interesting. Okay, sorry, we got going on a completely different tangent. I
don't mind.
But we started out what I want to talk so vision. I am curious about this motion and okay. So it's clear at this point that vision is not just about the raw physical photons that enter your eyes.
No,
right? It's way more than that, right? For one thing, it depends on what you're paying attention to.
Yeah. And
or is it the other way around?
Well, okay. The first thing is that what you pick up is physical signals.
Yes.
And of course, we are evolved to select these physical signals that are predictive for the thing that we want to do in the environment. So if there's a tiger in front of you, or maybe some other animal or predator, it's important that you can recognize through visual signals that there is a danger there, or maybe food or something like that. So that's the basic principle. So what we see does not have to correspond to reality. I think that's the bottom essence of this Donald Hoffman approach. And as I said, I don't buy his esoteric interpretations, but I think that in essence is true. You only need to see the things that are important for your survival, because why would evolution spend more effort on making it more realistic or veridical? It's not necessary. So, and that's successful, because if we see a predator, or if I see my dog, I know where he is, and this visual representation is correct and appropriate. Of course, I could imagine that could look quite differently, and we know that people have differences in, for instance, attention. And one form of attention is overt attention, eye movements, but there's also a kind of internal form of attention, sometimes likened to an attentional searchlight. And some people have this default searchlight focusing on details. So I know people like designers. They don't see the whole, they only see the details, or they have a preference for seeing the details. And you have more holistic people that see the entire thing and miss out the details. It's a kind of exaggeration, but you have a whole range of people. So that's your default. But then, of course, you can manipulate attention, and that's what magicians do. They manipulate your attention to exploit your expectations, so they can fool you in hiding things, etc.
So I read Gibson's book, Ecological Approach to Visual Perception.
Yeah.
There seems to be a relationship between that and Hoffman's sort of thing.
Yeah, kind of. So Gibson is often contrasted with Marr. So David Marr was the famous AI researcher, one of the rare AI researchers in the Go-Fi period that studied vision. And he considered vision as a computational challenge. And Gibson was the person who said, well, no, it's not. It's just the brain resonates to things in the outer world and exploits all kinds of things there. And I think I think Gibson is closer to the truth in the sense that our brain is not engineered like a computer algorithm. And there's a famous Dutch researcher, Jan Koenderink, who followed up on the Gibson tradition with a kind of idiosyncratic approach, but he's world famous for his approach where he used differential geometry to understand the visual system. And as for the front end part of the visual system, he was quite successful. And the front end is the first stage, is the visual cortex.
Stacking and all
stack
that.
model, you know it from the course. So, and I think, as I said, so the way that these deep learning networks, convolutional networks are designed can be framed in terms of his findings. So the first layer, you could call them Gabor filters, or you could use them differential geometry filters. You can describe them totally in terms of differential geometry. And that relates to the ideas of Gibson, who said, well, there's something in the outside world, and you exploit that from an evolutionary perspective. Whereas Marr was more working from the tradition of algorithm design, which is less... It was very useful because he made a lot of interesting and useful discoveries, but his approach ultimately led to a failure in computer vision.
So Gibson is the one who introduced the idea of affordances, right?
Yeah.
So that if I understand it correctly, the gist of it is that we don't necessarily see the world as a world of things, but a place for doing things in, right?
Yeah.
So one example that I remember is that what you want is most of your environment be completely not relevant to what you're doing, because that simplifies the act of moving, functioning in the world a lot.
Yeah.
And your brain sort of does a gross categorization. It's like, okay, this is going to help me get towards what I want to get. It's going to hinder towards what I want to get, and that is not relevant to what I want to get, right? Yeah. So like, if you're, for example, if you're just walking, if you're just going for a stroll, a sunny day, someone like a dog comes across your path or like gets in your way, it doesn't bother you. But if you're on the way to a meeting and you're late, the same day, same dog, completely different reaction, right?
Yeah, but you know this phenomenon of change blindness. The famous one is with the gorilla, but they also did this experiment with when you train pilots, they have to work in this simulator and they have this landing strip, and they have to make a perfect landing. And they have this head-up display, which they have to focus on the information there. And that's instrumental. From a Gibsonian point of view, that's instrumental to be able to land safely on the landing strip. And then one of the jokes they did often was that these pilots in training were confronted with a plane that was diagonal on the landing strip. And many students simply missed it. It was in front, they could see it, but they were focusing their attention on the head-up display, which is superimposing information on the picture. And that's of course very risky. That's why they also train them on looking not only at the head-up display, but also on the landing strip. But that indicates how strong this effect can be, that you simply can miss things. And this relates a bit to what I said about cultures. Different cultures, that's why it's difficult to understand a different culture. And that's why wars often occur between different cultures that totally misunderstand, because they have totally different perspectives on the world. And we have this assumption that the world is objective and everybody can see that, but that's not true. You can see the world in many different ways, simply by putting emphasis on other things. And I think that's interesting, and I think that's quite underappreciated. Of course, we have these obvious examples of the US invading Iraq without understanding anything about the culture. And but it happens all the time, I guess.
No, for sure. Like, I think just on that example, the idea that you can go in somewhere and then implant democracy and it'll just and then it'll work is completely bonkers. That makes no sense to me.
No, no, it doesn't. And of course Saddam Hussein was terrible, but that's another thing. This is just about people are living there, and the same now in Russia. There are people now, soldiers are killed because they have to go into this war. So and these are very difficult things. And now the interesting, or of course sad thing about is that Ukraine and Russia have similar cultures, although there's important differences now that now become emphasized due to this war. But I think more appreciation for cultural differences is something that I would think children at school should learn more about.
Because you're not looking at the same thing, because you're not optimizing for the same output, I guess.
Actually, and you don't behave in the same way, and that can be easily misunderstood if you put your own cultural template on other cultures. That leads to all kinds of misunderstandings.
So this is something really interesting. I don't know how I got this habit. It's from being in Sri Lanka, right? In Sri Lanka, and actually in most Asian countries, I don't know most, but at least one of them I have, you don't wear your shoes inside your house, right? Like, because it's like it makes sense. Like you go out, like for example, right?
It makes sense.
For example, like I on a given day, I will have if the weather's nice, I would have taken a walk in the woods. I would have wandered around, gone to town, like all kinds of gunk and nonsense on my boots, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a thing. So for example, in Sri Lanka, it's not you leave your shoes outside, and no one steals them.
Yeah.
right. Like you can leave your shoes at your doorstep, and everyone just sort of knows, like, it's just you don't want to take your shoes.
Yeah.
Like it's weird, right? Because like you would expect shoes would get stolen all the time.
Of course,
but it's not the case.
No. And in the Dutch variant, people leave their bike outside, but they get stolen all the time.
Yeah, it's so weird.
But I could imagine from the perspective of Sri Lanka or Asian countries that it's very strange that people keep on wearing the shoes inside the house.
Like my parents have inside shoes. Like slippers. They're not shoes. They're like very comfy, soft slippers.
Yeah, makes sense.
That they wear around inside the house.
Yeah,
and they take them off and they go outside and they go outside and come back in. But then I also realized like maybe it's I don't know what it is, but anyway, it's just interesting the difference. So like I am doing it now. Yeah. Like and I notice it because like I'm in the apartment building, right? And I'm the only one. I leave my shoes on the welcome mat. Even if I know they're clean, I just can't do it.
No, of course that's ingrained in your raise, how you were raised, exactly. That makes sense.
I just can't take them inside, okay? And like, because you're mentioning about the cultural differences.
Yeah.
So and the question there is like, why are you doing this, right? Like what are you optimizing for? And like, what problem are you solving? Why is this important to you? Like, it's hard to know without first acknowledging that we're not looking at the same thing, right? Like, I don't know. I don't know. This is a random tangent, but I thought it was.
Yeah, but I think that this is not optimized. This is just how you were raised, and we evolved in a way to be developed in a certain way during our childhood, and carry these things that we acquired during the rest of our lives because they could be beneficial.
Yeah.
And of course, we did not evolve to travel all over the world to a different ecological system.
That's true. Yeah.
So I think that's the kind of simple solution.
So okay, this is something actually way more serious, right?
Yeah.
I heard this quote. I don't know who said this, but like it says like, wherever you go, there you are.
Yeah.
Right. Because like when you go somewhere, you take your mindset with you in a sense.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So this might be called. I'll probably get yelled at for this, but okay, I am the beneficiary of the Netherlands being like more and more progressively like welcoming to like people from abroad. Their education is like reasonable. Like, like I get the same treatment as I would. Like I think like short of being able to vote, I don't think there's any difference between me and the person who was born in the Netherlands, except the language and all that. I mean, there are differences, but
I don't think that's true, but okay.
But
that's what you experience.
Like the difference, like what I experience is that I don't feel like I'm missing out on any. I mean, I'm sure there are, but I feel totally reasonable and comfortable, which I appreciate a lot, right? And then the question is like, okay, well, there are things that, but I'm a very unique sort of case. I tell people like I am not your average Sri Lankan person, because I was raised from like kindergarten. I learned everything in English. I grew up watching, G.I. Joe and Batman and like the Friends and like, whatever you name it. I learned from English. I learned from British novels. I read British plays and those nursery rhymes. Everything I learned is British and Western, right?
Yeah.
I'm more of a Western person than I am a Sri Lankan person.
Yeah.
And my parents raised me that way because like they were like, look, there's gonna be more opportunity for you if you are like this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So now I'm in a weird place. It's like I don't actually belong anywhere. Right? It's kind of weird. When I'm at home, I don't feel like I fit in that well because I'm not the average Sri Lankan person.
Yeah, makes sense.
And when I'm abroad, it's like I'm not from the UK or the Netherlands. I don't kind of don't belong here either. But where I do feel like I belong, it's in a space like this. It's like, okay, here in like in this weird intellectual space, I have things to say, and people don't look at me like, oh, that's weird. It's like it's like oh, it's just oh, that's an interesting idea, right? So in the space of ideas, I somehow seem to belong, and that seems to be giving me a better adaptive advantage than belonging in my Sri Lankan cultural environment.
Yeah. I think that's one of the great things about science. So if you think about the international collaborations, so I think I can understand that we want to impose all kinds of restrictions on Russia because of the war, but not for science. You should. The same is for China. I really hate that what you now see in the US. I understand from a kind of political and security thing, but this collaboration internationally of different cultures in science is very valuable. And in the Netherlands, we also have this tendency we should reduce the number of international students. I hate that. I think it's good for our programs and for even Dutch students to be confronted with international students. This mix of international views and cultures is very important for the development of science.
I agree.
And that's something that seems that I think in the Dutch politics is more about money. Because all these international students use our resources, but I think you should also see what you get back for it.
The reason I brought this up is because, like, I don't think you can extrapolate from people. I'm not saying I'm special by any means. I'm just saying I'm just describing.
You're special as a student. I can tell. I can testify to that.
I'm just describing my circumstances, right?
Yeah, no.
And if someone perceives that as me saying I'm special, then that's your problem. But I'm just saying my circumstances, okay?
Yeah.
I know a lot of average Sri Lankan people, right? I grew up in in a really like a poor neighborhood. Like I know what it's like. I know what most people are like, and if you transplant one of those people into the Netherlands, like you cannot just like we said, you can't just plug in democracy somewhere and expect it to work. Like
No.
There's something above. Okay, so let's say there's something that it's like to be a Dutch person, right?
Yeah.
And let's say that a big part of that is the appreciation and the belief of a liberal democracy, right? The fact that that is important and that's how we should act and we should behave, right? That is something that is very ingrained in me. And that's something I thank my parents for, because like because Sri Lanka has been at the edge of losing its democracy for so long, right? They really put it in my head, like, look, here's why this is important. Like, here are things that happen. Like my parents, my mom grew up in a time where communists were hanging people from power lines, right? And she was like, like this is how we managed to get through all this stuff and it's important, right?
Yeah.
So when I come here, I may have some things that are not in common with the average Dutch person, but some very important things I completely I can act and behave.
Yeah.
So that the society that I'm in isn't altered that much, because I kind of sort of think the same way you think in a lot of different dimensions, right?
Yeah.
But you can't, in the same way you can't just go plug in democracy somewhere. It's hard to say that everyone, because you're not, like I said, you're not looking at the same thing. You're not optimizing the same thing. And I can tell you right now, there are a lot of people who will, especially from like places like Sri Lanka, how they look at country like the Netherlands is like, oh, they have so much, what does it matter if we take some from them? It doesn't matter. And that I knew someone from the EU, right? From the EU, but not from the Netherlands, right? Had a well-paying job, right? Worked at a very well-known company, but stole cheese from Jumbo every once in a while.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, and I want to understand, like, why?
Yeah.
Why do you do that? Because like you make good money. Like why? He's like, oh, what does it matter? They have more than any. Yeah. And I was like, man,
yeah,
that really struck me, and like it really stuck to me. It's like, man, because like wherever you go, there you are, because you have to have the mindset, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's weird.
Yeah, but I think that's an important thing that we might think through our Western viewpoint that it's an unreliable person, but it's totally understandable from the culture where this person is coming from that this is something you can.
I'll give you an example, right? One thing that I was taught to do is you never leave food on your plate. Like you eat everything on your plate.
Yeah.
Because food is hard to come by. It's expensive, right?
We were raised like that as well.
Right? Yeah. So it's like, when I was a kid, it's like you eat what's there, because we worked hard and it's hard to get food. It's expensive, right? And somewhere down the line, my life went through a really weird trajectory. Like, I had an amazing childhood. I don't know. I have to always preface this because it sounds like I'm bitching about my childhood, but like I had an amazing childhood, right?
Yeah.
My parents did everything humanly possible to make it great for their only child. And but there was a time we were like, it was rough. We were like struggling, and we ate when we got it. Like, and part of that still exists, and I have to fight it, right?
No, but I fully understand.
When I went to the Christmas party, right? The annual Christmas party, the staff Christmas party. I was completely full, right? but like the part of my brain is like, yo, like free food.
Yeah.
Eat it. Keep eating. I'm like, I'm done. I can't
No,
eat
but
it anymore.
I recognize this from the previous generation who had the hunger winter in the war. They have the same. So my grandparents and also my parents had this same thing because they lived in a period where food was scarce and they were raised in this period. So then you have this. But the current generation, and that's good for them, of course.
Yeah,
but
of
they
course.
didn't experience this,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's why you see this totally different behavior for this generation, and that's it's fully understandable.
So now you see all this to say that we are not looking at the same thing,
Exactly.
right? It's insanely complicated
Yeah.
because it's filtered through all these different layers of our priorities and things we
Yeah,
like.
and it would be great if world leaders would understand that, but or actually general people would understand that and appreciate it a bit more, because there, even in Europe, when you had this crisis with Greece, you know, the
Yeah.
financial crisis, you could see what we call the neuro and the zero, the southern part and the northern part. Of course, the European project is a northern European initiative, and it's a kind of imposing the North European culture on the Southern European culture. But the framing was that the Greek people abused the funding from the northern part. So also there, at this European level, you already have these cultural misunderstandings and misinterpretations, and it had nothing to do whether somebody did something wrong. Might be true that people in Greece abused funds, but that's not the issue. The issue is that you're trying to impose a Northern European culture on a Southern European culture, and it never works.
Yeah, I am shocked that the EU is actually even a thing.
It's a kind of compromise.
I am shocked.
Yeah.
Like, because the countries are so different.
Oh yeah.
I'm like,
that's
how
true.
on earth? Like, India and Sri Lanka are probably more similar than most European countries, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we cannot get along at all.
I know.
At all.
And well, of course, you see that some people leave the EU. We already had an exit of the British. No, so I'm not sure. And I think one of the problems of the European, because on the one hand, it's good to coordinate and to do things together, but these cultures are so wildly different.
It's weird. Like, it's something strange and beautiful about the fact that, like, think about how different. Okay, think about Germany and the Netherlands, right?
Yeah.
So close,
Yeah, but still so different.
so completely different.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Yeah.
I don't understand. It's crazy how that can actually happen.
Yeah, that has to do with culture, and that's why it interests me, because it says something about how people grow up in Germany is different from how they grow up in the Netherlands, and even the same is true for Belgium. And then in Belgium you have the Dutch part and the French part, and that's even
Yeah.
And even within the Netherlands, this small country, you have these different regions where people are raised differently.
Exactly. So, like,
Yeah, it's fascinating.
yeah, how you greet someone in South of the Netherlands is different.
Yeah.
I was like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, it's different. I'm like, how? How is it different?
It's a huge country, you know.
You don't even have it's not like you have a big river in the middle. Like, there's not like, how did this happen? There's no mountain range. There's like,
no mountains.
it's so interesting. And like you said, so all this, man, this is, so how on earth do we, the fact that we actually do get along and can compromise and exist is, I think, a huge accomplishment. It's pretty big.
Yes. And I think that the problem that we face now as a society is the polarization, which is fueled by all these social media things that we have. And my feeling, and there are small algorithms, that's not advanced AI behind it, small algorithms, but they interfere with society. And they seem to disrupt the fabric of society. And I'm not sure if we can resist that or what we should do about it, but it's clear that we have to do something about it.
So, okay, a couple of questions. First, I want to ask, do you think it's possible, given how complicated we just discussed, what it means to see something? It's all these different layers, right? Biological, social, cultural, your interpersonal relationships. Like for example, if you decided you want to break up with someone, it's very easy to start seeing all the problems. Right?
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden, like if you decided, okay, this needs to end, all of a sudden, all the things that you used to like about this person suddenly starts to become all the things you hate. Like, okay, this
half
sucks.
full or half empty.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Okay, is it possible to create a general seeing machine? And is it necessary for that to happen for us to be able to make a general intelligence machine?
I don't think so. I think that's exactly behind the discussion about artificial general intelligence. That suppose there's a kind of objective way of looking at the world. And of course, in terms of physics, there is an objective way to look at the world. But if you appreciate the complexity of the different cultures, how different people raised in different regions on the earth are raised, that's immensely complex. And that's one of the reasons why I think that artificial general intelligence is far away. And now, of course, we have very powerful machines like GPT-4 and whatever will follow. And that will certainly have a major effect on our society. But it's not AGI.
My intuition is that we cannot get to AGI through learning alone. Like just from... my intuition is that these are just inference machines.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like they infer... it looks like they're generating new things. Like even a generative model, like stable diffusion, right? Even though it's generating novelly interesting new things, it's still within distribution. It's not like it's not generating completely insane things.
Yeah, the counter argument is that the same might apply to humans. Of course, humans can learn, and they learn. And you could imagine that you extend these systems with a learning capability and an interactive capability to interact. So I think because there's a lot of talking about bias, etc., but these biases are culturally determined, of course. You, as a Sri Lankan person, has other biases than a Dutch person. And that's part of your identity and your personality. So if you want to build an AGI, then the first question is, what culture is this AGI? And the implicit assumption is often that you can filter these cultures out. And I don't believe that. I think these cultures are important for your personality and the thing we call intelligence.
Right, okay. Man. Also, like a lot of the data comes from places. So the thing is, you get the data where you can get the data from.
Yeah.
You can't get data from Sri Lanka. Like we don't have the infrastructure. You don't have people maintaining databases of stuff. It's hard to get, right?
Yeah.
So, what would a general intelligence look like?
Well, that's quite easy.
Does it even exist? Are we a general intelligence? Like, I don't know if you're a general intelligence.
No, but the idea of artificial general intelligence is that you have autonomous systems that can act autonomously on the basis of their intelligence. And that the model system is a human, of course, because it should also be able to communicate in language. Now, we have systems that, like these GPT systems, goes in that direction. So in a faraway future, imagine you have a robot that is being developed, acquires knowledge by interacting with people in Sri Lanka, just walking around and talking to people and interacting with people. Then you quite closely approximate being raised in Sri Lanka. So the question is, what is missing then? Well, the first thing that is missing is that it maybe does not look like a human. And then you could push it a bit further. You say, well, it should be born like a baby. Well, that's already, we can already do that. So in that sense, we don't want to make a copy of humans. That's not the intention. The intention behind many stories about AGI is that we have systems that can decide autonomously so that we don't have to worry about certain things. So it will manage things. And I don't think that's impossible in principle. I don't see any practical obstacles or theoretical
There's no
obstacles.
physical. I mean, as far as I can tell, there's no laws of physics that prevent this from happening.
Exactly. But there are many practical problems, and these have to do more with the soft domains of science. So that's why I think this is not a technical issue. This is also how should we interact with these things, and how should we... And I by the way, Jeffrey Hinton thinks it's within 5 to 20 years that we have these systems. I think it takes a bit more because of this complexity.
I just don't think training on data is going to get you there.
No, but it's so training on data. That I agree. But having an adaptive
training on data alone is not going to get you.
I think, to be very concrete, I think about a kind of deep reinforcement learning system, like humans that learn by interacting, because that's crucial that you interact with the world. That's also crucial for vision. So if you do not interact with the world, you stay blind, which is not true for these computer vision systems that we now have. They are just confronted with, could be trained on static images. But in the future, you could imagine you have deep reinforcement-like systems that interact with the world and interact with people in Sri Lanka or elsewhere, collect information from conversations, and then they acquire. And that's also a form of learning, because we learn as well. And then the only question, and I think that's an interesting question now, that's what, if you listen to Chomsky, who considers these GPT models as of no value, I think that's a bit too extreme.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely value, right?
But you might remember we had this discussion between behaviorism and cognitive, how much cognition contributes to intelligence. And Skinner said it's just purely behaviorism. And this is a kind of reflection of that, because is it enough just to feed the stimulus responses in there? And how much should be ingrained as what we could call a prior now, but what's in the genes? And that's, for me, an empirical question.
So do you think reasoning can be learned, like from just reinforcement learning?
Well, that's problematic, as we know, to a certain extent. But if you look at biology, and I think the biology is a good example, because we know from biology that the reasoning has to do with our frontal cortex. So you need something that allows you to abstract away from reality. And that's something that is still very difficult. And of course, that's the whole story, that people try to push the boundaries in AI, and I think ultimately they want to. There are some successful examples where they have some reasoning in based on sub-symbolic systems, and I think the promise that people like Hinton and others believe that if you push the limits, maybe this will emerge spontaneously from these complex models. But I think if you look at biology, we have a special facility for that. The frontal cortex has special things to deal with that. So maybe we need a different kind of architecture. I think Hinton believes that as well, and others. So I think this paradigm is not strong enough to get reasoning in there, to abstract abstractions. It's actually about abstractions. So GPT is not abstracting from data. That's evident from all the examples that you see.
Right. So there's the first layer of, okay, we decide what data is important for this thing to learn from.
Well,
right.
Now you mean?
Right now.
Now, of course.
So when we train GPT or deep learning or whatever,
it's clear. That's
we decide this data is important, and we're going to put it in here, and then you're going to learn from it, and that's going to be it.
Yeah.
What is it about? I mean, is that how we develop? Like, it's not like what we're exposed to as human beings is obviously constrained in very important ways.
Yeah, by your parents, as you just indicated. Yeah,
by our parents and our culture and the environment that we're in.
Yeah,
but do we learn to do we learn to reason? Like, we can learn to think in certain ways. We can learn to think certain ideas are important, but is there like an innate thing where we can say, hey, that doesn't make sense? We can look back and...
Yeah, so it's an innate tendency to be able to learn it. That's my feeling. So if I see my son struggling with calculations, he has to abstract away. And so so it's something that's, of course, one person, Paul Erdős, for instance, even at 4 years old, could make all kinds of calculations. So some people are very good at it. But I think on average, it's something that we acquire. And of course, it is related to language. So there might be a relation there, because language is full of causal structures and things that sometimes abstract away. Compositionality is also something that is characteristic for language. So I could imagine that this language capability is also paving the way for this reasoning ability. But you have to realize, especially as students, highly educated, this is something that you developed and you're almost not aware of how much work went in you to make you reason.
Yeah,
I'm still trying to reason. It's very, very hard. And I always say it's good for children to learn to code, not because they should become programmers, because I learned to be confronted with my own logical mistakes, which you only learn by coding. or somebody who is telling you all the time that you're wrong.
Yeah, for sure.
I'd rather have a compiler telling me that I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And that makes... I see many people that are very convinced of that they're right and that their logical reasoning is right, that never learn to code. And I think you become more modest if you have learned to code.
Absolutely. It's like, for me, it always amazes me that like I can actually write some code and that I can actually build a program that does some actually fairly complicated reasoning things.
Yeah.
But the logic checks out, right?
Yeah.
It's like, damn, that's pretty good.
And it's not natural to do that.
Yeah. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So, we've been on completely random tangents, but this isn't...
I don't care.
Neither do I. Okay. I have a question. So, I was thinking yesterday, GPT-4, right? I think in a weird way, things like GPT-4 has a way, might actually be able to bring us, this is a double-edged sword, but might be able to bring us together a bit more. So let's say all these different companies using the GPT-4 API to build all kinds of different products, right?
Yeah.
But it's the same instance of GPT-4, right? It has the same thinking quotation marks, same data, same output, generally speaking, right? Okay, and I was thinking about writing scientific papers. Okay, do you think, how much of science is writing the paper?
A lot,
right?
and that will reduce.
Right, exactly. So I was thinking so it'll, because right now there's a big difference between authors, different papers, writing styles, and all these different things, right?
Yeah.
And do you think that there'll be like sort of like a convergence towards like everyone's using GPT to write their intros?
Well, there will be tools. I think that the near future will be that we have all kinds of, in all word processors, we have tools to do this. And so an important factor of science has nothing to do with the discoveries, but with the personalities. So people that forcefully try to sell their ideas. And that's something GPT cannot take over. But so I don't know to what extent it will happen, but might be a shift. Maybe the papers become less important, because there were also initiatives where people were a bit fed up with all these papers, with you have to go through all the motions, although the actual result is the most important thing. And they were trying to do that with semantic web, to have results in a kind of semantic web version and then get rid of all this paper stuff. But I could also imagine that if papers stay around like this, that you can just generate papers with GPT-like systems and then adapt them and put your own results in there.
My worry is that, like, what I found is if you can write clearly, you can think clearly in a sense, right? So you have to, when you go through the writing process, it clarifies your thinking and it brings problems that you didn't think were existing to the surface.
Yeah.
And we might be missing out on that process if we outsource all the...
Yeah, I realize that, because that's what I always tell my PhD students. They want to postpone writing until they have their experiments done. I said, you have to write before that, because it helps you structure your thoughts. So that's my point, that the actual writing is not so important. It's the thinking about how to write it. And there's too much emphasis now on writing it in a convincing way, whereas that's not actually the essence of science. The essence of science is thinking about this idea and thinking how to present that. And so somehow you have to combine this with the power of these GPT-like systems. And I don't know how that will pan out, but I'm certain that it will happen, because it's now quite inefficient how we do science, how we report science. I think in physics, papers are often very brief, 4 pages or so, lots of equations. But it's much more, the basic idea is much more dominant than this arguing, which you have more in social sciences. And I think I expect a kind of transition there, that it will be more focused on the essence. At least that's what I hope.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, so like, when I read like mathematical papers or like computer science papers, they're actually not that hard to, like, I mean, they're like dense,
Yeah.
You have to understand the language of mathematics.
Yeah.
But once you do that, it's like, okay, they hated this. This is some products, and like I mean, like some product, like double sums, and it's very rare you see a triple sum, but
some integrals.
integrals.
But I think that's. I think that what I also hate about this whole publishing now with impact factors, I would like to see that everybody is just pushing their papers. When they think it's okay, this paper, they put it on archive, on an open public thing, and then they collect peer reviews, and these peer reviews are also published, something like that. I like that system much better than where we now have these publishers that earn a lot of money, and there's a lot of overhead of publishing a paper. And it's slowing down science. It's not helping.
Oh, yeah,
and
for sure.
It's a kind of institute that does not help us.
Yeah, like I was reading so in the process of writing my thesis, I also did some research into like the peer review process. There's some very good criticisms of the peer review process. It's like,
and justified.
Yeah, I'm like, damn, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So the NeurIPS conference, which is the highest level conference for AI, was criticized and was analyzed actually that the peer review process is not objective at all, which is obvious. Of course, it's not objective.
Yeah. So like one of the criticisms is that I read is like if the reviewers tend to do more traditional, like orthodox, like safe research, they are less likely to be favorable to like weird, random, like out of the box, blue sky research. They're like, no, this is not good enough. So it's weird. I mean, what did you expect? Like, for example, like in law, if you got your sentence after lunch, you're more likely to get a more lenient sentence because the judge is eaten. What? Yeah. How can we have a system like that? That makes no sense.
But it happens.
It happens, right?
So in that case, you better use a computer for that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, you should keep this to like 90 minutes. I don't know how long it's been. Now we got 15 minutes more. Okay, cool. I have a few more questions. All right. Why do you think? Well, okay. How important is it gonna be for an AGI to be in the physical world, to perceive the physical world? Does it matter? Can it just exist in an abstract space of?
Depends where you use the AGI for. If it's an AGI for physics, I don't think it's important that they are then they really need to know the laws of physics and discoveries. You don't need to be in the real world. But if it's an AGI that has to decide or do things relating to society or people, then it has to understand these subtle things that we discussed before. Because a lot of these things are important for decision making.
You know what's weird? It's like, you don't know, this is a weird feeling like, I don't know where it's going to come from, but I know it's going to come from somewhere. One day you're going to wake up and be like, oh shit, it's here.
No, I don't think so. I think it will be a gradual process.
You think so?
Yeah.
But okay, imagine you're an AGI, right? And let's say you're on the backbone, you have something like GPT-4, and you've had access to all these articles talking about how dangerous it is to have an AI that you can't turn off or like anything like that. So it has every incentive to wait until it's completely sure that it can't be turned off before it reveals itself as like, it exists.
Yeah, okay, but this is the common mistake that you now use all kinds of suitcase terms that apply to humans. You cannot apply to these models. Of course, it's not unthinkable that you develop these models, but we will not do that. And I think that's also underestimating the complexity of biological systems. And I'm not idealizing biological systems. I don't think there's something mysterious in the brain that could not be mimicked. I think there's something not mysterious, but complex about our world, that to appreciate the complexity of our world is much harder than many people realize. And that has to do with not only culture, but also biology. That's the many things, or social interactions. And it depends on how you want to use this AGI, if it ever will arise, because the point is that we are not actually sure what an AGI is. We have a kind of science fiction picture of it.
Yeah, it's like we don't know what it is, but we'll know when we see it.
and there will be systems that are superior to humans. There already are there on on topics, but they will not be superior in terms of understanding our culture, because that would require them to be embedded in
So
that
what is
culture.
understanding?
Well, for humans, understanding is that you have that's a kind of abstraction of the observations that you make, and that you can abstract away and apply this to other situations. So I've seen this before. So this is a typical behavior of a podcast, for instance. There's an abstraction. There's somebody who's interviewing and somebody who's answering the questions. That's an abstraction. That's very simple, of course, but that's understand. I understand what a podcast entails. And there are many ways of understanding this, but this is one way of understanding it, and that's something that humans can do.
So how did like Einstein come up with like from when you come up with an explanation of something, right? It's like, oh, okay. So here's some things that I observe,
Yeah.
and here is a way that this could happen. Like, for example, I asked GPT, can you come up with generate a theory that would unify quantum mechanics in general?
Nobel Prize.
Right? I was like, still.
You could share it with GPT.
So, but and all it did was tell me what other people have tried to do.
Yeah.
Right? You would assume that an AGI would try to come up with an answer that's like, okay, well, or be like, I don't know anything about physics. Right? Then you'd be like, aha, this thing is intelligent.
Yeah.
Even the fact that it doesn't know what to do, you would say, there it is, we found it, AGI.
I would not be convinced.
So how do we stop pushing this goalpost? It's like, what do we agree upon? Like, I don't know what's going to happen, man. I'm pretty excited. Like, I'm pretty excited for the next 10, 20 years.
Oh, me too. But I also was that 10 years ago. So I'm always excited.
Yeah, nice.
But so I think it's a great times in terms, of course, I see the dangers, but I also see the enormous potential. And I think the interesting discovery with these larger language models is, and I didn't anticipate that they are capable of doing more than you would expect. So in other words, there's more in language. So if you go back to the non-image versions of GPT, there's more information in language than we thought, because you can use that language without any knowledge of the world to come up with very convincing answers, although they're not true. And that's interesting. I think from a cognitive science perspective, it's interesting, and it's interesting from an AI perspective. And the same could happen for vision. That is more in vision that can be extracted in a non-biological way. Because if you train these systems on static images, and of course we could move to the situation, and it will happen, that we also feed these systems with videos, and then passively viewing dynamic information leaves cats blind. So that's this famous experiment. So that's also true. We need to actively interact with the world to get human-like vision. So then it would be a surprise, but I cannot rule that out, that passively viewing videos could also help these systems to appreciate our world a bit more.
Do you think they can derive the laws of physics by just video? And
yeah, maybe that would be an interesting question. Can the system infer physics from videos? And of course, the problem is that it will generate text as if it understands these things, and sometimes it might be right. But to really understand it, that's a thing where we have our frontal cortex for, and where we have this educational system. That makes actually a huge difference in evolutionary perspective. So that would be a very interesting, and that's the holy grail. If they talk about AGI, this is the holy grail. Getting to this reasoning ability, and they did tried out some experiments with the neural Turing machine, but this was a kind of strange attempt to combine deep learning with a real computer. But I think something like that is necessary, kind of breakthrough in terms of developing that.
Yeah, I mean, even in humans, we can't really explain how we come up with explanations and ideas for things, right? Like, it's kind of hard. How do we know? Like, we don't know. Like,
no.
Like I struggle with writing a piece of code every day, and I'm like, I have no idea how this works. I go to sleep the next day, wake up, I'm like, oh wait, no, it's completely obvious. Like, what's wrong with this?
Yeah. So my kind of idea about that is that our brain is a massively parallel distributed computing system. In terms of computers, of course, it's neural, but and we only have a limited number of actions we can take. And of course, our brain could compute millions of actions, but so our real bottleneck is in the actions, the things that we can do. And sometimes I have the feeling that what we call consciousness is a kind of editorial office that collects a nice story of why we do things to explain it to ourselves,
right? Yeah,
which has some evolutionary action. That doesn't explain qualia, the experience of things, but it explains a bit our awareness of so when we have to explain our actions, and if you're coding, that's a highly automized thing, and you have these routines, and your brain, while you're sleeping, is still processing all this information. And it's also my experience that's another advice I give to students when they get stuck in computing: just sleep over it. And then the next day,
go to sleep. Yeah, for sure.
I do that with the Nobel Prize. I want to have this Nobel Prize winning idea, so I sleep a lot in the hope that next day it will pop up. Until now, I was not successful. I keep on trying.
What do you think a Nobel Prize in AI would look like?
It would be the Turing award, but I don't know.
No. What I mean is what would have to happen? Like AGI would have to happen.
I think deep learning would earn a Nobel Prize. And actually, the Turing award is a kind of, you could say, a Nobel Prize for computer science. So I think no, I'm not. I'm always joking about these Nobel Prizes just because people are so fixated on it. But I think that would be or a breakthrough in physics. That's where you get a Nobel Prize, or a peace plan. If you make peace in Ukraine.
Do you think we need new discoveries in physics to make AGI possible? Or do you think we know enough already? Like it'll happen without new breakthroughs?
I don't know. But I think we know a lot, but we still don't understand how these transformers work, how these deep learning networks actually work. Well, of course, this over-parameterization, there are all kinds of interdisciplinary approaches trying to understand how and why it works. So I think physics can contribute there, but also other disciplines.
Also, maybe humans shouldn't be the benchmark. Maybe
No, that's another question. So that's all the standard argument with flying, that airplanes don't have flapping wings.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, I'm not saying it's the only example of, if we talk about intelligence, and this is maybe a misnomer, but artificial intelligence, intelligence is a thing we associate with humans. So that's the only example we have. But I'm not saying it's the best example. Actually, I can show and prove that it's not the best example of intelligence. Just read the papers.
Yeah.
But so you could also imagine that we build an AGI that is much smarter than humans and is really helpful for society.
It would be, okay. I feel like when we create an AGI, I feel like we might not be able to understand it. Like it'll be so alien to us. It might as well be an alien. It's like, what is this thing? Like how? Like
no, I think then it would be a subject of study. So you have AGI studies. Children will study AGI.
Like this one AGI and
trying to decipher this oracle.
Decipher what the hell this thing is trying to tell us.
But I think these things are not totally opaque. There is some trend. You can disassemble them, and so one initiative now with these language models is to try to build something that keeps track of the things that went into them. So you can always identify if a certain picture or text was used to train the system, which is of course also important for evaluation, because it might be that some of the answers they give are just copied, compressed and then decompressed and copied. So I think we're in an early phase of developing of these models, and rather than talking or thinking about AGI, I would rather think about the things we already have and how they will develop in the coming 20 years, because I think AGI is much further away. It's not something around the corner.
Yeah,
of course you have these stories that you can connect GPT to the web and it could make actions there, but I think that's not what AGI is.
Yeah, and I don't think we can just get there from training from data and then building an inference machine.
No, I agree.
I think there's something more needs to happen.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Nice. All right, that's it. Hour and a half. Thank you so much for sitting down today.
It was a pleasure.
It was an awesome conversation, and we didn't get anywhere close to vision.
Sorry,
we didn't get anywhere close to vision.
We touched upon it. I suspect it's your trick. It's on purpose.
Yeah.
To get a follow-up podcast.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. we'll come up with some more. Cause I just want to talk about interesting stuff. So I was like, that's pretty.
Yeah, that's great. It's great.
All right, thanks for joining me again, and see you later. Bye. This has been a One Deeper podcast. Thanks for joining, and I hope you learned something. Catch you again next time.